My friends, there is a fire that lies hidden in the heart of the empath, a fire often mistaken for weakness because it begins as sensitivity, as tenderness, as compassion. But know this: the empath's anger is not destructive rage, it is the awakening of presence. When the empath dares to own their fury, they no longer drown in other people's chaos, they stand rooted in themselves. Every empath carries within them a delicate, almost fragile sensitivity, a deep attunement to the emotions, energies, and unspoken pains of those around them. This sensitivity, while a gift, has a shadow side that often goes unrecognized. The shadow of compassion is not a flaw, but a hidden burden. It is the tendency to absorb the suffering of others so completely that one forgets oneself. It manifests as an almost compulsive need to fix, to soothe, to give, even when it costs the empath their own well-being. This shadow grows quietly, feeding on self-denial and the constant suppression of anger or frustration. It whispers that caring means sacrificing, that love requires surrender, that empathy is valuable only when it is given endlessly. The empath becomes a vessel for the world's pain, and in doing so risks losing the grounding of their own soul. Yet within this shadow lies a profound truth: the depth of compassion is inseparable from the capacity for self-awareness. To recognize this shadow is not to reject empathy, but to honor it fully. It is to see that true compassion does not demand martyrdom, and that the empath's power is not measured by how much they absorb, but by how authentically they engage with the world while remaining whole. The shadow of compassion teaches the empath that anger, boundaries, and refusal are not betrayals of kindness, they are necessary companions. It shows that the empath's light is strongest when it is balanced by the acknowledgement of inner limits, by the courage to confront injustice, and by the willingness to hold space for oneself as fiercely as one holds space for others. In this understanding, the shadow of compassion transforms from a weight that drains the soul into a guide that sharpens presence, cultivates discernment, and ignites the inner fire that allows the empath not only to feel the world, but to stand within it fully, with integrity and power. Anger, for the empath, is often misunderstood, a feeling to be suppressed, hidden, or apologized for. Yet, when seen through the lens of depth psychology, anger reveals itself as a vigilant guardian. It is the signal, the inner alarm, the body and soul's way of saying, something is wrong, something must be acknowledged. Unlike rage that destroys indiscriminately, the empath's anger carries intelligence. It is precise, discerning, and fiercely protective. This anger arises when boundaries are crossed, when one's truth is dismissed, or when the empath has given endlessly without reciprocity. It is a sacred fire, warning the empath against self-betrayal and the slow erosion of their soul. In its presence, the empath learns to recognize the moments when saying nothing is dangerous, when yielding is harmful, and when silence becomes complicity. To embrace anger as a guardian is to honor its role without letting it consume. It teaches discernment: who deserves your energy, where your voice must be heard, and what cannot be compromised. It transforms sensitivity into strength, softness into armor. The empath, once hesitant to assert themselves, discovers that anger is not a rejection of love or kindness. It is the assertion of self-respect. Through this lens, anger becomes a teacher, a boundary setter, and a source of clarity. It is the force that awakens presence, that sharpens attention, and that insists the empath step fully into their power. Far from being a flaw or a weakness, anger is the guardian that ensures the empath's light does not dim, that their compassion is neither exploited nor diluted, and that they can stand in the world with integrity, awareness, and unwavering strength. There comes a moment in the life of every empath, a pivotal moment, subtle yet seismic, when the weight of unspoken frustration, suppressed resentment, and internalized pain can no longer be carried silently. This is the turning point, the threshold where sensitivity meets self-realization, where the empath faces a choice: to remain submerged in the currents of other people's emotions, or to rise and claim their own presence. At this juncture, anger ceases to be a hidden ember and becomes a guiding flame. It illuminates the patterns that have kept the empath small, compliant, and invisible. It reveals where their boundaries have been ignored, where their truth has been silenced, and where their gifts have been taken for granted. The turning point is not a dramatic event in the world, but a profound shift within the psyche, a recognition that self-neglect is no longer an option. This moment demands courage, for it asks the empath to confront the discomfort of asserting themselves, to navigate the unfamiliar terrain of now and nuff, and to feel the intensity of emotions that were long denied. Yet within this challenge lies liberation. The turning point transforms vulnerability into empowerment, fear into clarity, and anger into presence. Here, the empath begins to see that their sensitivity is not a liability, but a compass. The emotions they once absorbed unconsciously can now be understood consciously, channeled constructively, and expressed authentically. The turning point marks the emergence of a self who no longer dissolves into the lives of others, but who inhabits their own reality fully, with a voice, a body, and a soul that are recognized as worthy of attention. In essence, the turning point is the threshold between survival and awakening. It is the moment when the empath discovers that anger, once feared, is not a danger but a doorway to presence power, and the profound realization that to honor oneself is to honor the world in the truest sense. For too long, the empath exists in a state of absorption, a silent witness to the suffering of others, yet a captive to it themselves. They feel the currents of emotion, the unspoken tensions, the unacknowledged pains, and often mistake their empathy for responsibility. In this state, the empath is a victim, not because they are weak, but because their sensitivity has been used as a vessel for other people's unresolved shadows. They carry burdens not theirs to bear, and in doing so, they lose touch with the anchoring center of their own soul. The journey from victim to witness is a profound turning inward, a conscious reclamation of agency. It begins with recognizing that while you can feel deeply, you are not obligated to solve the suffering of every soul around you. Witnessing does not mean indifference, it means presence without self-erasure. The empath learns to observe the pain, the chaos, the darkness of others, without allowing it to penetrate the sanctity of their inner life. This transformation requires courage and discipline. The empath must confront the ingrained patterns of over-giving, over-caring, and over-absorbing. They must practice discernment, choosing when to engage and when to release. They must acknowledge their anger, their frustration, and even their resentment, not as shameful flaws, but as signals guiding them toward balance and self-preservation. From victim to witness, the empath steps into a higher form of presence. They become a conscious observer, capable of compassion without being consumed. They can hold space for others without losing themselves, understanding that their power lies not in absorption, but in clarity and conscious engagement. The empath who has crossed this threshold experiences freedom, the freedom to feel without being enslaved by emotion, to act without being driven by guilt, and to shine without dimming themselves for the comfort of others. In this space, witnessing becomes sacred. The empath stands at the edge of their own depth, fully aware of the world's suffering, yet firmly rooted in their own essence. Anger, sensitivity, and compassion converge here, forming a presence that is both formidable and luminous. This is the power of the empath, who has moved from victimhood to witnessing, a presence that transforms both themselves and the world around them. The sacred, now, is one of the most transformative tools an empath can wield, a simple word that carries the weight of self-respect, integrity, and personal sovereignty. For the empath, who has long been conditioned to prioritize the needs of others above their own, saying no can feel almost heretical. It is often met with guilt, fear, or anxiety, because the empath's heart is wired to give, to nurture, and to absorb. Yet it is precisely in learning to say no that the empath discovers the true power of presence. The sacred no is not born from anger, spite, or rejection of others. It is born from love for oneself. It is the acknowledgement that boundaries are not optional, that energy is finite, and that self-care is not selfish but essential. Each time the empath says no to what drains them, they reclaim a piece of their life that was previously surrendered to obligation, expectation, or silent suffering. This is the moment when their anger, once suppressed or feared, transforms into clarity and decisive action. Learning the sacred now requires courage, because it often challenges deeply ingrained patterns of people pleasing, and avoidance of conflict. It requires the empath to confront the discomfort of disappointment, both their own and that of others, while understanding that true compassion does not demand self-erasure. Saying, "No," is an act of authenticity. It communicates to the world that the empath is aware of their limits and committed to honoring their own truth. In practicing the sacred "no," the empath discovers a profound paradox. The more they refuse what diminishes them, the more their capacity to give and to love expands. Boundaries do not close the heart, they protect it, allowing it to engage with greater clarity, depth, and presence. The sacred "no" becomes a declaration of identity, a marker of personal sovereignty, and a signal that the empath's presence is no longer negotiable or diluted. Ultimately, the sacred "no" is an alchemical tool, turning anger, frustration, and past self-neglect into empowerment. It signals that the empath has stepped fully into themselves, embracing their power to choose, to discern, and to stand unwavering in the face of external pressures. Through this practice, the empath learns that true presence arises not from endless giving, but from the courage to protect, honor, and assert the self. The shadow is the hidden, unacknowledged part of the self, the collection of fears, desires, anger, and impulses that society, upbringing, or personal judgment has taught us to suppress. For the empath, the shadow often contains the very emotions they have been conditioned to deny: frustration at being overwhelmed, resentment at being taken for granted, and the anger that rises when boundaries are ignored. To live in denial of the shadow is to live fragmented, carrying within the empath a silent storm that subtly undermines their presence and clarity. Integration of the shadow is the courageous act of facing these hidden aspects without shame or judgment. It is the recognition that what has been feared, repressed, or disowned is not evil. It is a part of the total self, waiting to be understood, honored, and transformed. By acknowledging the shadow, the empath learns that their anger, their intensity, and even their moments of discomfort are not weaknesses, but signals of authenticity. These signals guide the empath toward truth, reminding them of their needs, limits, and power. This process requires honesty, patience, and self-compassion. The empath must explore the depths of their psyche with curiosity, uncovering patterns of thought and behavior that no longer serve them. They must face the guilt that arises when asserting boundaries, the fear of conflict, and the sorrow of realizing how much of themselves they have given away to maintain harmony. Yet, in embracing the shadow, the empath transforms these once unseen forces into allies rather than adversaries. Integration brings wholeness. The empath who has faced the shadow is no longer fragmented by unconscious emotions or drained by the world's chaos. Their anger becomes wisdom, their sensitivity becomes discernment, and their presence becomes magnetic and grounded. The shadow ceases to be a burden and becomes a source of strength, providing the empath with the insight, resilience, and clarity needed to navigate life fully awake. Through shadow integration, the empath discovers a profound alchemy. The very parts of themselves they once feared or rejected become the foundation of their power. What was hidden is illuminated, what was chaotic is transformed, what was weakness becomes a conduit for presence. The empath stands not only as a mirror to the world, but as a fully realized individual whose anger, sensitivity, and compassion converge into a force that is both authentic and transformative. When the empath fully acknowledges their anger, integrates their shadow, and embraces the sacred "no," something extraordinary occurs. Their presence ignites like fire. This is not a fire of destruction or aggression, but a luminous, radiating force that commands attention without demanding it. It is the presence of someone who has confronted the depths of their own psyche, embraced their power, and refused to dissolve into the expectations, needs, and chaos of the world around them. Presence as fire is the embodiment of authenticity. People feel it immediately, an energy that is both magnetic and formidable, gentle yet unwavering. The empath who has learned to honor their emotions, assert their boundaries, and integrate their shadow no longer seeks validation. Their mere existence communicates clarity, strength, and self-possession. Others may be drawn to it, challenged by it, or even intimidated by it, but it is always real, undeniable, and alive. This fire is also transformative. The empath's presence no longer passively reflects the energy of the world, it shapes and illuminates it. It touches those around them not by trying to fix, soothe, or rescue, but simply by being fully seen, fully felt, and fully present. In this way, the empath becomes a beacon, a living example of what it means to honor one's own soul while navigating the complexities of human relationships. Yet fire demands responsibility. The empath must cultivate discernment, ensuring that this radiant presence is used for integrity rather than control. Anger and sensitivity, when harnessed consciously, feed the fire without consuming it. Boundaries and self-awareness act as the hearth, keeping the flame steady, focused, and purposeful. Presence as fire is the culmination of a journey from fear to empowerment, from absorption to clarity, and from self-doubt to self-possession. It is the outward manifestation of inner transformation. The empath's anger has become a guide, their shadow has become wisdom, and their compassion has been tempered with discernment. In standing as fire, the empath does more than exist. They illuminate, they inspire, and they claim a place in the world that cannot be ignored, diminished, or erased. For the empath, the journey of awakening is a delicate dance between two seemingly opposing forces, the heart and the flame. The heart represents tenderness, compassion, and the capacity to feel deeply for others. The flame represents anger, presence, and the fierce insistence on self-respect and boundaries. Too much heart without flame leaves the empath vulnerable to exploitation, emotional overwhelm, and the slow erosion of their own essence. Too much flame without heart creates a presence that can alienate, intimidate, or burn bridges unnecessarily. The true mastery lies in balancing these forces. This balance is not achieved overnight, it is cultivated through conscious awareness, introspection, and disciplined practice. The empath must learn to recognize when to soften and when to stand firm, when to give and when to protect, when to speak and when to remain silent. Each decision becomes an act of alchemy, blending sensitivity with strength, compassion with discernment, and vulnerability with presence. The heart without flame may feel endlessly, absorb endlessly, and lose itself in the currents of others' pain. But the empath who tempers the heart with flame discovers the transformative power of presence. Their empathy becomes a lens, not a leash, a tool for connection, not a conduit for depletion. The flame, in turn, becomes wise, guided by the moral compass of the heart rather than blind impulse. In this delicate equilibrium, the empath discovers freedom, the freedom to be tender without being diminished, to care without being consumed, and to assert without abandoning love. The balance of heart and flame transforms every interaction into an expression of conscious choice, every emotion into a source of insight, and every act of presence into a reflection of inner wholeness. This balance is also sacred because it mirrors the alchemy of life itself, the union of opposites, the synthesis of shadow and light, the integration of strength and softness. The empath who achieves this harmony no longer drifts at the mercy of circumstance or others' expectations. They become anchored in their own center, radiating a presence that is both fierce and compassionate, potent and gentle. It is in the balance of heart and flame that the empath steps fully into their power, embodying the paradox of sensitivity and strength, and illuminating a path for others to witness the extraordinary potential of a life lived consciously and authentically. The empath's destiny is not merely to feel, to absorb, or to navigate the emotional currents of those around them. It is far greater, far more profound. It is to become a conscious force in the world, a presence that transforms, illuminates, and guides. This destiny unfolds when the empath embraces their full spectrum, their sensitivity, their anger, their shadow, and their fire. Only then can they step into the role they were always meant to inhabit. A bridge between human fragility and human strength, a living testament to the power of integration. For too long the empath may have believed that their role was to serve silently, to carry burdens without recognition, and to surrender their boundaries for the comfort of others. Yet destiny calls them to something radically different. To honor themselves with the same intensity with which they honor others, to assert their presence with clarity and courage, and to allow their compassion to be an act of conscious choice rather than unconscious surrender. The empath's destiny is entwined with awareness. It requires seeing the world without losing oneself, feeling deeply without being consumed, and responding with authenticity rather than habit or obligation. It is the ability to witness suffering without internalizing it, to act with integrity without becoming entangled in manipulation, and to love without compromising one's own soul. In this way, the empath becomes a model of what it means to live fully awake, fully embodied, and fully aligned with the self. This destiny is not without challenge. It demands the courage to face criticism, the resilience to navigate misunderstanding, and the discipline to maintain boundaries in a world that often seeks to blur them. But within these challenges lies the empath's greatest gift, the capacity to transform adversity into presence, struggle into insight, and sensitivity into power. Ultimately, the destiny of the empath is to embody a rare alchemy, to fuse heart and fire, compassion and assertiveness, vulnerability and strength. It is to live as a luminous presence, a guardian of self and others, and a beacon of authenticity in a world that often confuses conformity with strength. The empath's destiny is to show what is possible when one refuses to shrink, when one embraces their complexity, and when one allows anger, compassion, and awareness to converge into a force that is both transformative and transcendent. The gift of transformation is the culmination of the empath's journey, the sacred reward for facing the shadows, honoring the anger, and embracing the full spectrum of their being. It is the alchemy by which pain becomes wisdom, sensitivity becomes strength, and anger becomes presence. For the empath, this transformation is not merely personal, it radiates outward, touching every life they encounter, reshaping not only themselves but the world around them. Transformation begins with courage, the courage to face what has long been denied, the courage to claim boundaries, and the courage to stand fully in one's truth. It demands honesty, self-reflection, and the willingness to encounter the deepest layers of the psyche without judgment. In this process, every suppressed emotion, every fear, every moment of self-doubt is acknowledged and transmuted into insight, clarity, and power. The gift lies in the freedom it brings. The empath who has transformed no longer lives as a passive observer, absorbed by the chaos of others or diminished by external expectations. Instead, they move through life as a conscious presence, fully embodied and fully awake. Their compassion is deliberate, their anger purposeful, and their choices aligned with the deepest truths of their soul. They have become masters of themselves, capable of navigating complexity without losing integrity, capable of loving deeply without surrendering identity. This transformation is also a gift to the world. The empath becomes a living exemplar of what it means to integrate light and shadow, heart and fire, sensitivity and strength. Others sense this presence instinctively. It is magnetic, grounding, and quietly powerful. By transforming themselves, the empath opens the door for others to witness the possibility of wholeness, showing that true power lies not in domination or suppression, but in conscious awareness, authenticity, and the harmonious balance of the inner world. Ultimately, the gift of transformation reveals the highest purpose of the empath, to turn what was once a vulnerability into a force, to convert absorption into presence, and to embody a life in which anger, compassion, and awareness are not opposing forces but allies. It is the realization that the journey through shadow, pain, and sensitivity is not a burden, but a sacred path, one that leads to freedom, empowerment, and a luminous presence that leaves an indelible mark on the world. So I say to you, do not fear your anger. Do not bury it. Stand in it. Transmute it. Let it become the pulse of your presence. For in this alchemy lies your liberation, and the world's reminder of what it means to be fully alive.